Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Milton A. Barlow Center for our second installment in the Barlow Center Speaker Series, a new lecture series co-sponsored by the three organizations that reside in this building: the Brigham Young University Washington Seminar, the Church Educational System, and the Office of International and Government Affairs for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I'm Wes Anderson, and I work in the Office of International and Government Affairs. Tonight, we're honored to have as our speaker Congressman Jeff Flake. Congressman, thank you for being here tonight, and welcome. Many of you are students of the BYU Washington Seminar program. I'd like for those of you who are currently enrolled in that program to raise your hands so we can acknowledge you. Good portion. And I've also noticed standing in the lobby that a lot of you are former students of that program. How many of you have completed that program at one time? So welcome back. Glad that you're here for this. These are BYU students who are spending the semester as interns in Washington, D.C. This beautiful building has been built to serve as a resource for these students during their internship semester while they're here. The Barlow Center Speaker Series occurs once each semester. It seeks to inspire individuals to pursue opportunities in public service and to integrate their faith-derived values with that service. Invited speakers are recognized for their extraordinary contributions to society and their achievements in government, business, and non-government organizations. Above all, they are guided by personal faith. We'd like to begin with an invocation tonight offered by Debbie Fernie, who's a student intern in Congressman Flake's office. And following the invocation, Scott Dunaway, the director of the BYU Washington Seminar Program, will introduce Congressman Flake. Debbie.
Our Heavenly Father, we are so grateful for the opportunity we have to gather here tonight to hear Congressman Flake speak, and we're so grateful that he was willing to take the time out of his busy schedule to be here with us tonight. We ask you to bless him and to bless all the other leaders of our country, and please help that we will be able to get a lot out of his words tonight, and that we will all be able to travel home safely. And we love thee so very much, and we say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Congressman Jeff Flake is a fifth-generation Arizonan. Raised on a ranch in Snowflake, Arizona, the town was named in part after his great-great-grandfather. After serving a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in southern Africa, Jeff graduated from Brigham Young University, where he received his bachelor's in international relations and a master's degree in political science. More importantly, it was at BYU that Jeff met his lovely wife, Cheryl, who was not able to be here with us tonight because, as I understand, she's shepherding a group of girls at girls' camp. I first met Jeff and Cheryl in 1987 while he was a student at BYU and a participant on our Washington, D.C. internship program, the Washington Seminar. During that summer, he served an internship in the office of Senator Dennis DeConcini. Even then, he was recognized as a bright and able student with a flair for policymaking. At the time, his supervisor said of him, "Jeff learned quickly, adapted to the institutional habits of the Senate, and did so with an affable attitude." He received high marks for his internship, perhaps a harbinger of his future career in the House of Representatives. Congressman Flake was quite surprised that I still have his evaluation from 1987. They linger. Shortly after graduation, Congressman Flake started his career at a public affairs firm in Washington, D.C. Soon thereafter, with Cheryl at his side, he moved to the southern African nation of Namibia as the executive director of the Foundation for Democracy, a foundation monitoring Namibia's independence process. There, he saw that nation usher in freedom and democracy. Dennis Thompson, now an emeritus BYU political science professor, along with Jeff and Ambassador John Norton Moore, were key figures in helping to draft the constitution of that emerging nation. Many of our political science graduates at BYU have gone on to do remarkable things. However, I'm not sure that any of them have been able to fill the role as a kind of founding father for a new country, as has Representative Flake. For our students who are here tonight, I encourage encourage you to pay close attention to what we teach you in American Heritage. You never know when it may come in handy. Today I had a chance to talk to Professor Thompson just a little bit, and he mentioned to me that Representative Flake was one of his favorite students. He said he has always, from even the earliest time, he had a career focus in public service. And knowing a bit about the purpose of this lecture series, he said that the Congressman is a model for what we hope our students will be in the future in terms of their commitment to public life. In 1992, Representative Flake and his family moved back to Arizona, where he was named Executive Director of the Goldwater Institute. Congressman Flake is presently serving his third term in Congress, representing the 6th Congressional District of Arizona. He serves on the Committee on the Judiciary, the Committee on International Relations, and the Committee on Resources. Congressman Flake and his wife Cheryl have been married 21 years and live in Mesa with their 5 children. Please join me in welcoming my good friend and Washington Seminar alum, Congressman Jeff Flake.
Well, thank you. Thank you for this invitation. And I'm sorry I was supposed to do this in May, and had an excuse, I guess. The President asked myself and a few others to fly with him on Air Force One to Arizona. I don't think I'll ever have an excuse that good to miss another event again. But I'm pleased to be here today. On the way back, it was interesting flying back with the President to Arizona. We had a little downtime, and I had just been home teaching with my son, Ryan, who just turned 18, to a gentleman in our ward who had a heart attack the week before. And we'd been to the hospital, and he'd been home, and I needed to check in on him, so I thought, I'll just call him from Air Force One. And because the operator gets you on the line and says, it's Air Force One calling, I thought he might get a kick out of that. So I called his house. His wife picked up the phone. She, what's going on here? Air Force One's calling. And she went and woke him up from his sleep. And I was talking to him. It was going well. And then the President happened to walk by just while this was happening. And I thought, man, see what I can do here. I said, Mr. President, would you mind saying hello to a friend of mine? I said, he's had some heart trouble lately, and sure. I told him who he was, and the President gets on the line and said, Sid, W here. How you doing? People concerned about you here. And, there was a pause on the other side. I thought, he's had another heart attack. It's a very dumb thing to do. But anyway, it was, I thought, now I can finally mark my home teaching off with gusto at the end of the month here. But it was a great experience. If you don't like the speech, Debbie wrote it. That's the job that interns have in my office. But, no, I asked her if she'd like to, but she figured she hadn't been around me long enough, I guess, to know this. But she's doing a great job, by the way. And I see another intern I had, Mr. Brinton, is here from a few years ago. And that is one of the most fun things to do, is to have interns from BYU and in this program, because I know a little of what it's like, and I'll talk a little about that as I go along. But I've been asked to talk about how faith has enlightened my public service, and I thought I'd give a little background before I get to where I am now. As mentioned, I am the 5th of 11 children born in Snowflake. As the 5th of 11, I'm often asked, weren't you starved for attention and longing for love and affection? I say, honestly, I was just longing for food. I would have given all the affection in the world for seconds on dessert just once. But I don't think I ever had that. But it was a wonderful way to grow up. And I had an example of growing up, of civic involvement through my religion and through my my family and relatives. My father served a term as the mayor of Snowflake, which I think comes around by rotation in Snowflake, if you're a flake. Snowflake, if you don't know, is in northern Arizona. It was settled by my great-great-grandfather, William Jordan Flake. There are a lot of Flakes there by name and reputation, some say. But in fact, when I got out here, it was during the Washington Seminar program. I went to a reception, and it came up in conversation with someone that I was from Snowflake. This guy didn't know my name was Flake. And it turned out he knew somebody from Snowflake, but he couldn't remember who it was, and thought for 10 minutes, what's his name? I thought, I'll narrow it down for him. I said, was this guy a Flake? He said, no, seemed pretty normal to me. So the name has been downhill ever since. It's tougher to be a Flake outside of Snowflake. But my father served as mayor, my uncle on the school board, other uncles in the state legislature on numerous county and city commissions. My uncle, Jake Flake, if you can believe it, served as the Speaker of the Arizona House. In addition, they served in numerous church callings in bishoprics and stake presidencies. I don't think I fully appreciated the sacrifices that they made at the time. I do now. And I must confess that these sacrifices are far greater than I give at this time, with all the family responsibilities and the church and community responsibilities that they fulfilled. They gave a great example to me. After high school, I served a mission in South Africa and Zimbabwe and returned to Snowflake. The first words my brother Larry, my just older brother, said is, "Welcome home. Do you want to go to Hawaii?" I said, sure. And BYU Hawaii he was headed to, and I decided to go with him. I think there were 13 of us from Snowflake who went at the same time. As soon as we arrived in Laie, we dropped our luggage and ran to the beach. And there was a girl from California there who, when she heard my name, Flake, she laughed. And now I got the last laugh. Her name is now Mrs. Flake. That was Cheryl. Just as an aside, we were back in Hawaii with our 5 kids 3 weeks ago. And then we went to that spot where we met on the beach and reminisced. And then my wife was sure to take the kids to the spot on campus near the tennis court where she dumped me 3 weeks later. And groveling works. I had to do a lot of it later on. But anyway, after a semester of fun at BYU Hawaii, we decided to get a little more serious about school and about each other at BYU in Provo. And we dated there for a while and then married. And a little about faith. I had the same decision that a lot of you have had to make. What do you study at school? It takes a lot of faith, I can tell you, to get a degree in international relations and then a master's in political science and believe that you can have a good job for the rest of your life or a good job to start with. That applies to any degree, but in the social sciences it's even tougher. You really have to go out and work for it and look at it. But I appreciate my wife, particularly in this regard, for her encouragement to do what I loved. And even at that time, I loved politics and I loved policy. And she knew that I would be happy if I was able to make money at it, any money at some time. And she encouraged me to do that. And I had a great experience at BYU. And the culmination was the Washington Seminar program. It was a little different for me. I'd finished my bachelor's and finished all but a few credits of my master's degree. I'd already defended my thesis and decided to do the Washington Seminar program. And Scott Dunaway was here at that time running the program. This was before they had a center like this. There was a lot different. But we had been married for a couple of years, and my wife found out a few weeks before we were to drive out that she was pregnant with our first. And we pulled out of Provo on, I think it was April 1st, 1987, with a 10-year-old car pulling a trailer fashioned out of a pickup bed. We looked like the Beverly Hillbillies, and were just about as naive and stupid to think that we could just up and move to Washington, D.C., do an unpaid internship, and stay and find a job with a pregnant wife and not much than first and last month's rent to our name. And we started out, it was snowing on April 1st in Utah, and going over Parley Summit. we were pulling that trailer. It's a 75 Scirocco we were driving, and the snow was piling up so fast I couldn't stop, and all of a sudden my wife says, "I'm getting morning sickness." That's a bad time to start, but she was really sick, and she said, "You got to pull over." I said, "I can't, or we can't get started again. We'll slide backward down the hill." She said, "What do I do?" I said, "You'll have to roll down the window." and she did. She rolled down the window, and I'm going to head out there for quite a while. And it's snowing like crazy, and I just couldn't stop. She pulled her head back in, and she literally had icicles hanging from her eyebrows, and she said, "Tell me it can't get any worse than this." That was, I can tell you honestly, that was rock bottom, and it's been up ever since. Somebody asked me where we lived out here. This was before the Barlow Center, obviously. Oakwood Apartments is where everyone else stayed, but we had heard that there were people out here who like to go west, families, LDS families who like to go west for the summer, and that a lot of them had pets they needed house sitting for or other issues, and so we wrote to a number of people, and we were just flat lucky, and we lined up, I think, 3 or 4 different houses for the entire summer, and we were really blessed in that regard. Cheryl's morning sickness didn't end there. Driving in every morning, our first place was in Rockville. There was a couple of park benches that she would stop at on Constitution Avenue and have to let her out of the car, and she'd go and throw up and then come back. One of the bums that lived on that park bench knew her by name. I mean, he'd see her every day. "How's it going, Mrs. Flake?" "All right." But she did an internship. I'm sorry, she was a receptionist for Senator Hines at the time, and I worked, as mentioned, for Senator Dennis DeConcini, a Democrat. And I've spent the rest of my career trying to purge that from my record. It was tough, but he was actually a conservative Democrat and doing a lot of good things, and I had a wonderful time there. The supervisor that wrote that review, I believe, was Tim Romer, who served as congressman after he was a legislative assistant and directed me during that time. So he had a 10-year career in the House. He's now retired from the House, and I still work with him on a number of issues. Senator DeConcini, by the way, comes in now. He's now a lobbyist. He comes in and lobbies me. I tell him, "Go sort my mail, then I'll think about it." What goes around comes around. So think about that and tell your bosses, treat me nice. The tables could turn later on. But I've had a great relationship with him as well. I've traveled overseas with Senator DeConcini, and it pays to have good relationships and keep good relationships with those that you meet, because you never know how long they will last or how valuable they'll be in the future, and that certainly has been the case in my case. As mentioned, we were here for the internship, and then I lucked out greatly and was able to get a job right downtown with a firm that had some clients in South Africa and Namibia and Angola, areas where I'd been on a mission. The partners there thought it would be novel to have someone who spoke Afrikaans, which I'd learned on my mission, that I never thought I would use again. But it came in very handy. In fact, I got a call the other day from U.S. News and World Report. They had heard that there's an Afrikaans-speaking member of Congress. And some of you may have seen the clip in the Washington Whispers column last week. They mentioned the Afrikaans, but the bigger part of the story was they mentioned that Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie's child is not Namibia's first famous American child. They said that honor belongs to Ryan Flake. They mentioned that they asked how I got there. I said, well, it was a classic Brad Pitt, Angelina Jolie story. We were escaping the paparazzi and ended up in Namibia. It wasn't exactly that. It was to run a political foundation, but Ryan was 1 year old at the time. He was born here, and Cheryl, still ticked off at having a boy first instead of a girl, entered him into a beauty contest of sorts, and he won. He was named Namibia's Baby of the Year and won about $1,000 in prizes, which we promptly spent and haven't said a thing to him since about it. Until this article, he reads it and thinks, man, where's the loot? But anyway, we had a wonderful time. We after 2 years here, went to Namibia with the client and spent a year there, and it was a great experience, particularly near the end. And as I'll mention later, some of the most fulfilling parts of this job is where there is an intersection of sorts between church and state. And in Namibia, we were able to be there when there were only 12 members of the church in the entire country. It's a country about twice the size of California, mostly arid, about 2 million people. But there were 12 members, and they were hurting so bad for leadership that I was branch president during that time. And we had a traveling branch. We'd travel to where there were 4 members up here or down the country where there were members, and it was an incredible year that part of the reason to get Dr. Dennis Thompson, over to Namibia was to help on the Constitution, which he did. In fact, there is a provision on academic freedom in Namibia's Constitution that owes to Dennis Thompson's input. He made sure that that was there, and other issues as well. But another thing, we wanted to get Dennis Thompson there to make sure that he would go back and plead the case to get missionaries in Namibia before the transition occurred, which he did, and spoke to Elder Neil A. Maxwell as soon as he got back to the States, and within 3 weeks we had missionaries in Namibia who carried on from the transition, and missionaries have been there ever since. Cheryl and I traveled back a few years ago, and there are over 200 members, and they have a chapel, and it's just a wonderful thing to see. It was a great time to be there. I'll skip ahead quite a bit. We came back from Namibia, spent a couple more years here, and then back to Arizona. And I spent 7 years at the Goldwater Institute, and then decided that I had always thought at some point, maybe after the kids were raised, that I might run for public office, but a seat came open a little sooner than we expected. And I went to Cheryl, and where it took Cheryl just about 2 minutes to agree to go to Namibia. I said, "It's sunny there, and you might have a maid." She said, "I'm there." That was an easy one. It took her about 6 weeks to help me decide whether or not it was the right time to run for Congress. We got very lucky, and my first run for public office, I was able to bluff the voters well enough to get in, and I came here in the year 2000 or 2001 when I started. But after I won the election, before I was sworn in, I can say that those in public office are always faced with the decision and I guess decision of how you can stand as a witness for your faith at all times without wearing your religion on your sleeve. I was given what I considered very sound counsel from one of my church leaders, my stake president, after I was elected. I was counseled during that time to always seek for spiritual guidance whenever I had a decision that was a consequence of the position I held, but that I should not feel compelled to publicly acknowledge the source. And that I have considered very good advice as I've gone along. The Lord he counseled would not feel slighted, and I've tried to take that to heart, and I think it's been very wise counsel. Politicians, as you know, are ever mindful of their image. Every congressman has a press secretary that compiles press clippings whenever you're mentioned in the media, and you try to leverage those for more influence. And I asked my press secretary the other day to compile some and to see how I'm being quoted or what kind of image I might have out there, and he put together a few, and I thought I might give you some sense of the range of how you might be viewed as a member of Congress. I'll first start with the good ones, I guess. I was called a leading conservative by the Los Angeles Times a few months ago, an outspoken fiscal conservative by the Washington Post, a free thinker in the Arizona Republican tradition, said Bob Novak, a conservative's conservative, said the Dallas Morning News. Flake has been a thorn in the side of the GOP leadership since he was elected to Congress in 2000. More surprising, Flake won admirers on the other side of the aisle, earning points from honesty from the likes of Barney Frank and Henry Waxman. I'm not sure how to take that. And then the descriptions, physical descriptions. A tall, ruggedly handsome man with thick arms and broad shoulders. But then this one, I should stop there. Flake is a sunny-looking sort of guy with a slim build and blow-dried blonde hair. He looks like a surfer or maybe the manager of a guitar center in Ventura or El Segundo. Outwardly cheerful, happy, and ill-suited, facially anyway, for the politics of this sort. So that was the Rolling Stone. I always wanted to make the cover. It wasn't the cover, but it was I'd played a role in reauthorization of the Patriot Act, and they liked some of what I did, but not some of the other. So you never know how you're described or how what your image is like. But those of us who proclaim religious affiliation appropriately worry about how our actions might reflect on others who share our faith. And I have found that as an LDS member of Congress, perhaps you face additional scrutiny. I recall my first attempt to pass legislation to lift the travel ban on Cuba. It's one of the issues, there's some heads nodding among former interns. It's one of the issues where I part with the president and don't share his view, or he doesn't share mine. I've been able to pass legislation several times that's been stripped out of bills under threats of veto. But after this one, I won a particular vote, and another member stood and yelled across the chamber, not into the mic, but certainly loud enough for everyone there to hear, "Flake, you call yourself a Mormon and you do this?" He didn't think it was proper for a Mormon to offer that kind of legislation, apparently. I haven't figured out why. I guess it's some consolation that this member is now serving 8 years in prison. Not for that remark, mind you. He had a little earmark problem, but you do. I don't enjoy saying that. He was a good guy, but you do find that you're under additional scrutiny. As I mentioned, one of the most rewarding parts of the job is being able to go around the world or elsewhere and to see the church grow. Before I travel, I will often call the church public affairs office and ask if there's anything in the particular country that I might be traveling to. Some are far-flung countries that the church is having issues with, or something we might be of assistance on. And sometimes they'll call ahead or set up meetings, and I enjoy that more than just about anything I do in this job. It is enjoyable, whether it's in Cuba or whether it's elsewhere. Traveling around the South Pacific or Central Pacific, Cheryl and I were traveling one time in the Marshall Islands. Marshall Islands are in the Central Pacific, a million miles from anywhere it seems, and it's just a group of hundreds of atolls, nothing higher than 6 feet or so. And we went to a military base there near the island of the Ebi. How many have ever heard of the island of Ebi? I hadn't either. Some said you need to surf eBay. It's just like surfing eBay or something. I suppose some go for that purpose. But eBay has a distinction of being the most densely populated place on Earth. It's an island about 400 yards wide and 1.5 miles long, less than 100 acres, and there are about 14,000 people there, just stacked on each other. Some who were refugees from the nuclear fallout when we tested in the Marshall Islands, the Bikini Atoll, and others 60 years ago. But as we rounded a corner on Ebi, there was a chapel, an LDS chapel. We had no idea it existed there, and then talked to some people who were affiliated with it, and it was a great feeling. Before traveling to Greece last year, we contacted the Church Public Affairs Office and asked if there was anything needed there, and they didn't mention anything in Greece. They set up some additional meetings later in the Ukraine, but we traveled to Athens, Greece, and Cheryl and I were walking around. We parted from the group. They were eating dinner somewhere else, and we were just on the streets of Athens, and we heard what sounded like hymns being sung. And we walked over and saw 8 elders and sister missionaries singing hymns in Greek. And we started talking to them. I happened to have a nephew who was serving there at that time. He was on a different island at that time. But they said, "Flake, aren't you a senator, a congressman or something?" I said, "Yeah." They said, "You're doing the fireside tomorrow night." I said, "Yeah, I guess so." It was something that hadn't filtered down, but we were scheduled for it, and fortunately it worked out, and we were able to be there, and there were about 60 missionaries and a lot of investigators as well, and it was just one of the greatest times we've had. Later on that same trip, we flew back through Iceland, and there were, I think, 8 members of Congress on the trip. We went to have dinner with the president of Iceland in his home, and we went in, and one of the first things he said, and he had no idea that I was LDS, but he said, "The president of the Mormon Church came here a few years ago, Gordon B. Hinckley, and he came to this place, and he started talking about that, and I raised my hand afterwards. I said, "That's great. We're LDS." And he said, "You are." He came over and grabbed us and took us upstairs and showed us the Icelandic statue, the monument to the first Icelandic settlers in Utah, around Spanish Fork, I believe. And he went to that ceremony, and he basically ignored the rest of the group the rest of the night and just talked about his, and President Hinckley had just finished his tour around the world for one of his birthdays, I believe, and this president of Iceland was following him around on the internet, basically, and knew his every stop, and was so impressed that way, and we couldn't believe it. And the other members of our congressional delegation were just blown away. They'd seen the missionaries in Greece, and then the Ukraine, and then Estonia, and then Iceland. And when we got back, Ed Markey, a Democrat from Massachusetts, was commenting to one of the other colleagues on the floor. He said, "Just traveled with Jeff here." He said, "These Mormons are taking over the world." They're everywhere. But that has been one of the greatest things we've been able to do. And one of the most rewarding trips I was able to take was just after the tsunami, 6 days after the tsunami in Southeast Asia. I traveled over with a number of, there were, I think, 4 members of Congress, and I was meeting up with them there. I got to the hotel, the Marriott Hotel in Jakarta, and as I will typically do, that was a Saturday. I was going to check and see if there were church services around anywhere. So I went to the concierge and said, "Do you know if there are LDS church services?" They said, "We'll find out." And later there was a note put under my door, and it said, forget it, it said LDS Church, and it gave the address. It said, "Campfire tonight, famous reverend in town." And it was Fireside, I think, was the campfire. I was a little lost in the translation there. And, the famous reverend was the presiding bishop, who happened to be there actually the night before. But I got there in time for the campfire, the fireside, and it was just the most incredible experience. They were putting together, and had put together in the preceding days, huge relief kits for the tsunami victims, who were about 1,000 miles away on the island of Sumatra, Banda Aceh. And we were able to travel the next day, travel on a Navy cod for 6 hours, sitting backwards, and then a tailhook landing on an aircraft carrier. And for me, who has a 23-year no-vomit streak dating back to my mission in Zimbabwe, and an unfortunate case of food poisoning there, I just about lost it at that time at the helicopter ride off the aircraft carrier. But we visited the Minister of Welfare And when he saw me, he came over and he greeted me and he said, "I just saw your uncle," who happened to be Gary Flake, who's my father's first cousin, the head of the church welfare program. And he said, "Please tell your church, thank you for the body bags." The church had contacted the Indonesians right after the event and said, "What do you need?" And that's what they needed. And the church got 10,000, and they asked for more, and the church got 10,000 more, and I think ultimately the church secured about 50 or 60,000 body bags for the Indonesian government, and they were extremely appreciative. The church had one of the first planes of relief supplies in, and it was just an incredible experience to see that happen, and to be able to see the church in action there. I'm supposed to end by now. Let me just say what a great privilege it is to be here. The rule around Washington is supposed to be, I think, if you ever walk out at night and see the Capitol all lit up and you don't get goosebumps, then it's time to go home. And I can honestly say that it's not time to go home yet, because it is still just a huge thrill to be here. As I mentioned, I'm so grateful for the way that I was raised and the religious upbringing that I have had and the opportunities that it has afforded me. And like I said, I am grateful for the times when church and state intersect and we're able to get together as members of the church. I should say there are about 14 or 15 active members of the LDS Church in the House of Representatives, and a number of us get together on about a bi-weekly basis and try to sit down and talk not of politics but of spiritual things, and it is a great respite in any week that we're able to do that, and there are some great people here. Of all faiths, at times I'll attend the Bible study group where members of all faiths will get together, and that is a great experience as well, to have people, someone will speak every time and give their own testimony or a devotional, and it is a wonderful thing to see, and you see a different side of people, and you really come to appreciate your colleagues a lot more when you see them in that light. But thank you again for the invitation to be here. Thank you, Mr. Dunaway, Brother Dunaway, and others who have made it possible. I can tell you I wouldn't be where I am today without the Washington Seminar Program and without the education I got at BYU. And I appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight. And happy, I guess, questions, and you'll take over from there.
Thank you, Congressman Flake. We'll keep you up here for just a minute. We'd like to ask you to ask questions, and you can give the answers, or you can go back and forth on that. You can ask the questions, they can give the answers, whatever you feel like doing. But we have Kate Hickman with a microphone, and she is going to bring a microphone. And just, if you have a question, please raise your hand. She'll bring it to you. Please stand up and give us your name, and if you're a student or if there's an association you want to make with yourself, please do that so we know who you are. And we'll go for another 10 minutes or so if the questions take the time.
Softball questions, please. Noelle Lashamanat just walked in. She's my scheduler, and Noelle was an intern who, in the middle of her internship, the scheduler was having a baby and needed to take time off, and so she moved from one to the other. So sometimes you never leave the Flake office. If you get there, we hold on for a while. She's done a great job.
Matt Waldrop, I'm a BYU student. I'm interning at the National Defense University run by the Department of Defense. My question is, the question of Mitt Romney maybe being a presidential candidate, do you expect any particular rising in negative press around these parts of the country or other political hotbeds about the church in the upcoming year or two?
That's a good question. Mitt Romney is a very bright individual and a very committed member of the church, and I think if anybody can handle the kind of questions that will come to him, he's the guy that can do it. So but you can expect a lot of tough questions to come up, and I think it'll be an interesting time. I for one, there are some who think that we are not at a time when a Mormon can be elected, particularly in the South, in the Bible Belt, and I don't believe that. I think that we're beyond that time, but that's not to say that it's going to be smooth sailing as it goes along. There have already been some columns that haven't been too complimentary, or some that dismiss the chances of Mr. Romney, but I think he's very bright and will handle those questions very well.
My name's Dustin Joyce. I'm a student, but not at BYU, and we'll just leave it at that.
Don't worry, you revealed it already. That's
It's good to know. Okay, my question is, obviously, the current immigration debate has really divided the country, and members of the church are no exception to that. So I guess my question becomes to you, sort of what's kind of your position on it, and how have your beliefs influenced that position?
Didn't I say softballs? First two of those. Well, as far as my own position on it, myself and Jim Colby from Arizona 4 years ago set out to write an immigration bill. And we did. We introduced it. The day we introduced it, John McCain joined us as a co-sponsor. We took that same bill and brought in some other people, one of which is Ted Kennedy. And so the so-called McCain-Kennedy bill is the McCain-Kennedy-Flake-Colby bill. It's the same one. And so pretty much identifies where I am on the debate. I believe strongly that this is a very complicated, complex issue, and it deserves a comprehensive solution, and that's what I hope we can have. To me, I don't think it's, obviously we need more resources on the border. We need to be concerned of national security issues, and for that reason, we need to ensure that we do more than just put resources on the border. It's easy to forget that half of those who are here illegally now didn't sneak across the border. They came legally and have overstayed. And so you have an immigration system from top to bottom that needs to be overhauled. And so I think we need to have a comprehensive solution. As far as how my beliefs have informed that, I grew up, as mentioned, on a ranch in northern Arizona. We had illegals working for us. At that time, it wasn't illegal to hire them. That only became so in 1986. At that time, it was very easy to cross the border, and they did frequently. Those that worked for us would go home to Mexico for birthdays and anniversaries, and they'd be back the next day or soon thereafter for work. Now it's very difficult to cross the border. It's expensive and dangerous, and so a lot of people come and stay. And so what used to be a circular pattern of migration has become a settled pattern, and the costs that are incurred by states like Arizona in particular, health care, education, criminal justice, are severe. So people are justifiably angry at the federal government's failure to deal with it. So I hope that we can deal with it. But in Arizona, I guess my own beliefs, it's hard to identify where my religious beliefs or just my upbringing. When you grow up in a small town, a small Mormon town, it's tough to decide where one influence stops and another begins. But I've said before that, some people say that people who are here illegally have broken the law, and they can never have a path to citizenship or never have other things. And my own view is I find it as hard to get angry as at a father who had come across the border to provide for his family as I do for a husband who breaks the law, taking his wife to the hospital to have her baby by speeding. It's hard for us, I think, to judge that way. Now, there are clearly those who are here for other purposes, and those who are involved in smuggling and whatnot who need to be dealt with according to the law. But for others, I think that we need to to be compassionate.
Thanks. Hi, thank you for coming very much, Congressman. My name's Natalie Wright. I'm at the Administrative Office of the U.S. Courts, and then I'm also a BYU grad. I have two questions for you. One, please give us some hints as doing missionary work in a federal government setting. I know, tough question. And then two, right now, I guess in the world, the U.S. is trying to take a stance where we're trying to be a model of a democratic nation and trying to lead a lot of rule of law efforts. Could you talk about what's happening in terms of rule of law initiatives in Congress? Are you involved in any of those? And what's successful right now? Thank you.
Thanks. Well, on the first, obviously, example is the best. And one thing that I've learned is that you never know how you're being watched. One, maybe as a member of Congress, but two, as a member of the LDS faith. And I think you're under kind of double scrutiny, like I said. But as in a federal government setting, I think example is the best. Don't assume that people don't know who you are or what you represent. And it may take time, but they come around, and example, I think, is the best. In terms of rule of law efforts, I'm not specifically involved too many. I'm on the International Relations Committee, and we authorize some programs that are going on I know in some countries in Africa, and I know there are some distinguished BYU alums who are involved in some of those, and I think it's great. We have I think, done some good work in a lot of countries in that regard, and I think it's a role that we ought to be playing. If we can help these countries on the front end, it certainly avoids a lot of problem on the back end. So, thank you.
Hi, my name is Lisa Gee. I'm a recent BYU grad. Two questions. The first one's a softball. Do you really blow dry your hair?
It's that Arizona wind. Does
Okay.
Just stick your head out the window.
My second question is, if you've ever been in the situation, or if in the future you ever find yourself in the situation where the Spirit tells you one thing and your constituents another in terms of what to do in making a decision, how do you act?
Well, I mean, the classic age-old question that's in civics classes everywhere is, are you a delegate or a representative? Are you responsible to your constituents to represent them, or do you represent your own conscience while you're here? And in fact, I just got an email a couple of days ago. I get a lot of email on the immigration issue, as you might imagine, given my position. And one of the statements was, it was just like this, and I thought it was perfectly stated, I guess, to make the point. The person says, why don't you know where your constituents are? He was implying that they're not where I am. You know where your constituents are. Why don't you represent them? Come on, be a leader for a change. And I thought that was an interesting paradox. You know where your constituents are. You need to be with them. Come on, be a leader for a change. And that seems to be cross purposes, and that gets to your question. I am one who really believes that particularly in the House, when you're elected every 2 years, that is sufficient time for your constituents to come back every time and see if they did the right thing in putting you there. But to get here and then say, I'm going to check the wind at every turn and see where my constituents are, I think is the wrong thing to do. I think when you get here, you're obligated to follow your conscience. I think that the most cogent statement on this was said by George Washington during the Constitutional Convention, when he said there was a proposal coming up. The people at that time still wanted a king, a lot of them. And he said, if to please the people we do what we ourselves disapprove, how will we later defend our work? And that, I thought, it was the most cogent statement. When you get here, you follow your conscience. And when then you represent that to your constituents, you explain that to them, you lead, and if they don't like where you are, they have the opportunity to remove you. So, good question. Thank you for that.
My name is Seth Moore. I'm a BYU student as well. I was wondering, I know your district is fairly conservative, the Snowflake is a fairly LDS community. What did you do in your first primary run in order to build supporters and in order to get started in politics from a public policy background as opposed to a political background?
Thank you. I wish Snowflake was in my district. That'd be a gimme, I think. I have 69 first cousins on my father's side alone, and I tell people that's how I got elected, because at least half of them voted for me. But I haven't been able to gerrymander the district to put Snowflake in it yet. But I have the East Valley, Mesa, Chandler, Gilbert, and it's a conservative district. I was at the Goldwater Institute, and I was involved in public policy for 7 years. So I'd been in the paper quite a bit, op-eds and what that I'd written, but I wasn't known out there. Even if you think you're well known, you really aren't. Still now. I mean, I can wander around Home Depot and whatever without being recognized, hopefully. But what I did was I decided I had a bit of an advantage that I was able to raise money from like-minded conservatives who were supporters of the Goldwater Institute, who I'd come to know, and so I was able to raise some money early. But I told myself that it's an open seat, there are going to be a lot of candidates, I'm going to go door to door as much as I could, and the little knob that's on my finger here from my mission still there after it became bigger after that campaign. I figure I knocked on about 5,000 doors or so. You don't go just door to door, you get what's called a walking list, and it tells you who voted in the last 2 Republican primaries, and you ignore everyone else. You just target those who you know are going to vote. And in fact, funny story, I remember doing that. I rented a golf cart, because even the most Republican areas, it's usually about 1 out of every 10 doors, except for some areas in Mesa that it's just every door. But so I would go to a door. If you say hello, if you talk to somebody, you typically have their vote, particularly when it's 105 outside and they figure you did this, I'll give you a vote. But I went to one and talked to the person, then ran back to the golf cart, and the golf cart had a big thing on the back that said Jeff Flake for Congress, and there was a woman parked in back of it, and I could tell she was upset at something, so I went to her door. I said, "Could I help you?" She goes, "Are you associated with him?" She pointed to my sign, and I said, what any politician would, I said, "Why?" She goes, "Because he's an idiot." And she went on. She didn't like my positions on something I'd written. She was one that actually knew who I was. And anyway, she went off for quite a while. I finally thought, well, I better let her know. I said, "Something you ought to know, that he is me." And she just turned beet red, stepped on the gas, almost ran over me. And then I don't think I got that vote. But I did. I knocked a lot of doors, did it that way. I had a particular advantage. One of my opponents was quite well known, the name at least, is Tom Liddy, who is the son of G. Gordon Liddy of Watergate fame. And so he had a name, but there was another candidate who I think near the end they figured that I might be gaining on them or might be in the lead. And so Susan was her name, she amassed a file. She hired a private investigator to amass a file on me. And all I can figure is that she thought this guy's pretty boring, and so she thought, I'll give it to Liddy, maybe he can do something with it. And she gave it to him, and he thought, there's not much here. I can't hit Jeff with it, but I'll hit her for being a dirty campaigner. And so it became a he said, she said in the paper about who amassed the file on Jeff Flake. And this is a great election strategy if you can pull it off, and I didn't try, but it happened. Both of my main opponents, 1 week before the primary election, were at the Arizona Republic taking a lie detector test to see who had done the file on me. And I would submit if you have that happen, you're doing pretty well. But anyway, I was able to, I think, get 33% of the vote in a field of 5. That was plenty. And then the general wasn't too difficult after that. But I believe I raised about $350,000 or so that first time. And it's been easier since that time. But it takes a lot of just getting out and knocking doors. And it had helped, like I said, that I'd been in policy before. It certainly helps in the debates you get in, but it's no substitute for just getting out and walking and working. So.
I know there are a number of people with questions still. Let's take one more, and then we'll wrap up.
I'll try to make this good, sorry. I'm Lisa, and I'm a BYU student, and I'm wondering, can you think of an example of when you've had to, in writing legislation or voting for legislation, where you've had to reconcile like a phrase that you didn't quite agree with, but the overall idea is kind of the direction you wanted to go? I don't know if that question was very clear. Do you know what I'm trying to ask?
Do I ever compromise?
Yeah.
Sure. Sure. On the immigration legislation, that's a good example. When you're negotiating with Ted Kennedy, you'd better hope that there's something you disagree on, or you probably aren't a Republican anymore. And in fact, I should say, I've been to Cuba several times now, and I advocate travel to Cuba, but every time I've been there, I've refused to meet with Fidel Castro. I think he's a thug and a tyrant and everything else, and he's even sent, when I've been there, he sent for me at the hotel, and I refused to go. My wife met with him. She came out and said, now I know why you don't meet with him. But anyway, one thing I've been worried about is a picture of me and Fidel Castro showing up in one of my campaign, in an ad against me. And so that's one reason for not meeting with him. Well, then I go do immigration reform, and I stand at a press conference with Ted Kennedy, and there are pictures taken. And I can tell you that Fidel Castro is about 20 points more popular in my district than Ted Kennedy. So it's not a wise political move there, but yeah, it happens quite often. Whenever you draft, particularly if it's going to be bipartisan legislation, there are always provisions that you're going to have heartburn over. Compromise is not a dirty word, certainly. I think Barry Goldwater, my political hero, once said, politics is nothing more than public business. Sometimes you make the best of a mixed bargain. And if you are headed in the right direction and you need to compromise to get there, then sometimes you can do it. But there are core principles, obviously, that you can't compromise on, and sometimes you are faced with that. And it's lonely sometimes voting no when there are just a few others. I don't know how many of you know Ron Paul from Texas. He's a Republican, but he's really a libertarian. He ran as libertarian for president one time. Quite often, it's myself and Ron Paul as the lone no votes. In fact, my daughter Alexis loves to come on the floor to vote with me, and they'll let your kids go on the floor with you. They won't let your spouse. It ticks my wife off to no end. But you take your card, that's the voting card, and you put it in the slot and push red, green, or yellow, and everybody lets their kids obviously vote for them, and then they get a thrill doing that. I think it's a federal offense if you get caught. But Alexis came one series of votes over a couple of nights when she was here in Washington. She was on there, and all the other members dote on her, and so she likes it. Anyway, after pulling the card out of the slot after 2 nights of voting, she said, "Dad, when do I get to vote yes?" She's learning. But I don't always vote no. But sometimes it feels that way, and sometimes there are positions that you feel that you can't go back on, And it does cause you. And when Ron Paul is sometimes, when I'm alone up there, I know that Ron Paul is on a plane somewhere, or I think, come on, get here. This is 435 green, or 434 and one red. But by and large, like I said, if you're moving toward the goal and you need to compromise on language, if you're moving toward the goal, then it can be done. That's part of politics. That's part of the process. But on certain issues, you simply say, these are my convictions and this is where I stand, stop. We passed the estate tax repeal. A lot of us think it ought to be repealed completely. Today's compromise was a lot less than stellar, but most of us voted for it in the end because it's a step forward. But thank you for that. Thank you for the questions. I can stay afterwards if anyone has a particular question that didn't want to ask here. Thank you.